Hey everyone, welcome back to the Overseers. My name's Proelios and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing. In this episode, we'll be doing a team preview of the Hangzhou Spark going into season 5 of the Overwatch League. And let's get right into it with discussing the tank line of the Hangzhou Spark this year, Nightwing. Um, the Spark have retained Guxue, LiGe, and BERNAR from last year, and are essentially going in with the same three players they fielded, or rather, two of them whom they fielded and one of them who was benched. But they have the same three going into the next season. What are your thoughts on Guxue? Let's start off with that.
I think Guxue has, throughout his entire league career, been an incredibly solid uh, tank in general. I think he has been overshadowed by some other tanks in the league who are at that just extremely elite level, but on that Winston role especially, Guxue is really, really good. And the other main tanks he's held up fairly well on as well. Bit concerned about how flexible he would be on the other roles. But to be fair, I think if the coach uh, sort of rotates the other tanks in and out, considering they have multiple and they're not just relying on Gushue, I think it should be fine. Uh, Even if Gushue is not very flexible on the other tanks that currently come under the off tank role.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Like, essentially, Gushua came into the season known for his Winston, right? But as time went by, I think he proved to be a very flexible player due to a strong mechanical skill. Uh, he was a really solid tank even coming into season 4, but he felt very disconnected with his team, and I think that's not his fault because the Hangzhou Spark have been so poorly managed in these past couple of years. They've gone through so many different coaches that the team doesn't really have an identity to their gameplay. And because of that, that mainly affects the tank line, which is supposed to take charge of how, like, where fights take place, when they take place, and the general, the general game plan going into any fight. So I think Gushue is still quite a solid tank. He also played a good wrecking ball last season, focusing on those slam engages in conjunction with Shai's Tracer or his Echo. But I feel like if it were up to me, I would move him to a better managed team in which he would have better support from his teammates. Because in the past 2 years, his skills haven't really been utilized well, and I feel like he might do better on a team like, for example, the Valiant or the Fusion, which are also in APAC and also have like a Korean and Chinese base for the most part. But he's still under contract, so uh, we'll just have to see how well he can play next season. Uh, I think let's move on to talking about BERNAR, who was the only off tank to play for the Spark last year because Liga was just perma benched. We'll come to that in a bit. But I was very low on BERNAR coming into season 4. But on an individual level, I think he did prove me wrong on, like, to some extent. Because I thought his positioning especially was great. He never seemed to feed, but again, like, he also feels out of place on this team because the team doesn't have an identity, for the same reason I mentioned for Gushua. And again, it would have been easy for him to get another team because he's got a lot of experience on mixed rosters, but he too is under contract. So again, these guys are just stuck with this team right now and they need to figure things out. So I'm gonna let you share your thoughts on BERNAR next, Nightwing.
Yeah, looking at the season 3 performance from Bernard on the London Spitfire, you would be completely fine to be very low on Bernard, but he did prove everyone wrong and he did perform really well, like you said. Uh, the Hangzhou Spark has a school of players to get through, so that's all I'm really gonna say about him.
Yep. And do you quickly want to touch upon Liga, who was part of the Spark for the entirety of last year but didn't actually play?
Yeah, Liga was benched, I believe, if I remember correctly, due to some mental health issues or just general health issues, something along those lines. And along with that, I think there was some reluctance from the staff last year to field Chinese players in general. It felt like they were only trying to shove in Korean players, and that's why Shai didn't even get that early spotlight, just because of how weirdly the rotating system of managers was working throughout the season. So I think multiple factors contributed to Liga not actually being played. Um, but I believe he does have some potential still. He was an exceptionally good tank when you saw him in contenders before season 4. So I think there's still a good shot that he can still make it work, especially since early reports seem to state that uh, characters like Diva are sort of dominating the tank role alongside Zarya and other off tanks, classically considered off tanks. So I think there's a good shot that Liga can still make it work, but obviously he's been signed as a two-way player, so you won't be seeing him in all the time, which I think is a smart decision because you don't want to dump your entire salary and your entire sort of faith onto Liga because of that performance last year, but uh, keeping him in because of his very real talent is also sensible. So yeah.
Yep. So it was, I think, partially because of mental health issues, but um, mainly Liga just didn't want to play last year, as far as I know. I don't know the reason behind it, but I do hope that he gets some playtime at least this year, because I felt like he could have been a Rookie of the Year candidate had he played in Season 4. So I think he'll still be very competitive going into Overwatch 2. And he's still under contract, so I think he intends on playing and the team intends to utilize him in contenders as well as in Overwatch League, because if he'd been misbehaving a lot and had issues with the team, they would have mutually terminated the contract based on what we've seen in the past from all of these teams. So yeah, I mean it's just it remains to be seen, right? Whether or not the team utilizes him and whether they have a better management structure to actually form an identity with these three tanks that they've got. But overall, I don't think it's a great tank line. I think they should have gone for a more aggressive overhaul this year. Uh, but I mean, we'll see how it goes, right? Let's move on to the DPS line then, Nightwing, which consists of Architect and Shy carrying over from last year, and Pineapple and AlphaYi joining this year. So let's kick things off with Architect, who was the main flex DPS player for this team last year. What do you think of him?
I think Architect is an underrated part of the league. I think he's consistently shown up uh, to a very like solid level uh, every single time that he's gone up on stage and performed. Uh, I think he's very flexible. He knows what to do in pretty much every situation. I think he's never that hyper carry like some players tend to be, but he's always just there and he knows his role and he knows how to perform it well. And I think that's going to continue in Overwatch too. I think to some degree you do want players who are just these absolute giga carry kind of players just because DPS will become more important in Overwatch 2. That said, I think Architect definitely has earned his spot on this roster still. And I don't think that's just my shock fan copium, remembering the old days. I think he's still definitely really, really solid and can make it work, despite some hiccups that you may have seen, just because I believe that was more of, like we've mentioned time and again, the management issue for the Spark more than the players being inadequate.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I may be completely wrong here, but I think Architect's like slowly getting overtaken by fresh blood in the league. Because like honestly, it's hard to remember how his recent gameplay was because he's played like a bazillion heroes for this team this past year, right? And hasn't got a signature hero or two that we can really think of. Like earlier on, back in season 1, we used to be like, oh, Architect, this guy plays Genji and Pharah. But now it's hard to pinpoint what exactly his role is within the team. He's the guy that plays whatever needs to be played, I guess. Um, but I am not high on him going into season 5 because even though his flexibility might turn out to be an asset with more heroes being added to the game, he's not the only flexible player in the league. So he'll still need to work hard to find success. But like you said, Nightwing, the man's got a lot of talent. So I think if he pushes himself, he can really get things done. Um, but on that note, let's move on to the player who did get a lot of things done for the Spark last year, which is Shy. Um, and Shy is a really solid hit scan player who debuted last year in the Overwatch League, and he surprised everyone with his insane mechanics. I mean, not me as much because I'd watched him in contenders and knew what to expect, but Shy flexed onto a lot of heroes, and his echo was widely praised, even though I felt he was a little inconsistent on it. But all in all, his flicking as well as tracking aim is absolutely bonkers, as we saw when he was playing Ash and Tracer. So I think with this kind of god tier mechanical skill and also the ability to flex onto different types of heroes, he should be very competitive in Overwatch 2 as well. What are your thoughts on him, Nightwing?
Yeah, I feel like it's way too often that anyone that's analyzing the Overwatch League turns into sort of a scopium sniffing machine where like you see someone in contenders hit a shot and then you're like, ah yes, I knew this guy would do well, because people were saying the same thing about Mike Kelly as well to some degree, and look how that's turned out, right? I think it takes a great deal of talent to actually convert even contenders success into Overwatch League success, and Shy absolutely made it work on multiple heroes, especially the Echo and Ash. And I think, yeah, that's going to continue. He's extremely mechanically skilled. Uh, his flexibility still, I feel, has some room to improve because of the new set of heroes that will be coming out, hopefully, for Overwatch 2. Um, but that said, I think he'll definitely hold his own just because of how cracked this guy is on the heroes that already exist. So that's all I have to say, really.
Okay, now let's quickly talk about Pineapple, who's a really solid hit scan player coming in from Bilibili Gaming. Now, honestly, I don't have much to say about him because I haven't gone very deep into his gameplay. But from what I've seen, he has great mechanics and he can also play a really good tracer. So he's kind of going to fit into that core hit scan role with, um, I think, with the niche possibility of flexing onto tracer in case the team wants to play a dive comp or something like that. But it's a good addition to the team because it's a good backup for Shy as well for double hit scan metas. Like even though they do have Architect who also plays hit scan, I think it's just better to have some more proven recent talent from contenders brought in, especially from within the Sparks own family, right? Because Bilibili Gaming is the Sparks parent company. But yeah, I mean that's all I really have to say about him. Do you agree with my thoughts here, Nightwing?
Yeah, I think Pineapple is a good addition. And I think there are situations where you'll see him pick up the tracer, though I think there's many other DPS players that they've got that can also flex over. I think it really depends on what's the other DPS that you want to make succeed in the comp, right? As for the hit scan roles, yeah, I think he'll just be sharing time alongside Shy. I think either of them can do it just as well. Um, yeah.
Okay. And the final DPS for the Spark this year is AlphaYi, who is a very good flex DPS player in my opinion, also coming in from Bilibili Gaming. And he's without doubt one of the best echoes coming from Tier 2 this year. I watched him play an absolute ton of echo, and like I think he's got the best Winston duplicates I've ever seen. But on the downside, he sometimes acts over ambitious. He's playing double bubble, duplicate Zarya, and gets no value. So he needs to work on his decision making a little from what I can see. But I'm sure he'll still be very competitive this season as a flex DPS player, especially if he is utilized as an echo specialist, which I think would make sense for this team because none of the other players have a really consistently strong echo, I would say. So those are my thoughts on Alpha E. Any additions to make, Nightwing?
Yeah, I think it's still a mixed bag, I think, of who'll actually end up playing the Echo. Just because I could realistically see Architect Shy or Alpha E pick it up. So I don't really know. I think it remains to be seen because playing again at the contenders level versus the Overwatch League level is still different. So once they've got some time in scrims and seeing which player is actually performing better, that's when they'll actually probably figure it out. I think it's a good thing that the Hangzhou Spark has this tendency to sign way too many players, because going into a new game, you want to dedicate some players into learning new heroes and some players uh, to sort of still just continue on with the older heroes. So I think AlphaYi is still a good addition coming in from Bilibili. So I think it's a good DPS line overall.
Yeah, I really like the DPS line as well. And let's then move on to talk about the supports, which are Super Rich and Irony. Now, Super Rich is a top tier main support coming from Team CC, and I believe Nightwing, you should talk about him a little bit.
Yeah, so Super Rich has been just like the object of admiration by many many teams looking to scout him for quite a while now. I think even last year there were a bunch of people that were pretty upset that he wasn't already signed to the Overwatch League, and he finally comes in now, and he's going to be quite good. I feel uh, on those main support roles. I think there's a world where I can see the Hangzhou Spark sort of regretting that they haven't picked up one more support, just because you do, I think, need to consider the possibility of a double flex support scenario, like basically every other team is doing at the moment. That said, they do have probably an advantage almost compared to many other teams, uh, if the game favors a more Lucio or even Brig or Mercy favored scenario, just because Super H is really that good. Um, and I think that will really show in sort of matches where those heroes are picked up instead of double flex support. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, for sure. I'm also super high on Super Rich. Naturally, who wouldn't be? Like whoever's watched him play in contenders has seen him dominate alongside the likes of Gaga, Liga, and Fawe 1987 on Team CC, and he's got an insane Mercy and Brig especially. We haven't seen too much Lucio from him just because um, the Chinese region has just been playing a lot of ball uh, centric comps in recent times. But with Mercy and Brig covered, I think those are two of the stronger bases going into Overwatch 2. Um, and I think Super Rich is going to be absolutely amazing, especially alongside Irony, who, according to me, is a top tier flex support as well. He is coming in from Bilibili Gaming, so he's got pre existing synergy with Pineapple and AlphaYi. And I think Irony has insane mechanics and decision making. I feel like he doesn't get talked about a lot, uh, even though he has achieved a lot in the contender scene. So I do probably rate him higher than most analysts, and I'm a huge fan of his Ana, especially because he's insanely accurate with his sleep darts, and I feel like many people are sleeping on how good this guy is. So, in my opinion, there's a slight chance he might break through to the topmost tier of flex supports. But like the flex support market is absolutely stacked as usual, so there's no certainty over here. But I still think Irony is going to be fantastic. Any thoughts on him, Nightwing?
Yeah, I mean, the only real competitor to Irony has been Kyo to some degree in the Chinese region. And that really goes to show that he is kind of at that very peak of his career almost at the moment, in the sense that he hasn't really dropped below second place this entire past year in basically any tournament, just because the team has been doing that well. I haven't seen too much of his individual tape, just because that's a bit hard to access for me. But I do think that he has the chops just based off of the results that he's shown, and the synergy he has with his teammates in the Spark. So I think that will really work to their favor. I would like to say again, though, that the Spark really does need another flex support just to round out their bases, because I think that double flex support might be something that will be really important, considering how every other team is building their own roster.
Yeah, for sure. Double flex support has become like a major point to judge a team by this year, just because of how much more like mechanics are going to be valued in Overwatch 2, right? So we'll see how things go for the Spark. But let's talk about their coaching staff before we close out the episode. And this year, the Spark have got, surprise, surprise, another new head coach, Changgoon. And Changgoon is the ex head coach of the Seoul Dynasty. And he's had decent success in Owl before, winning a championship with London in 2018 as an assistant coach, and also coaching Seoul as a head coach for 2 years and maintaining a fairly high level of play within his team. But he hasn't had any extraordinary showings as a head coach, so I think he'll keep the roster competitive. But the extra oomph that he requires to push for tournament wins or the championship has to come from the players themselves, in my opinion. Because Changgoon hasn't really he's been very useful on the strategic front, I think, but not so much on the individual gameplay front. So I'll let you chime in on that, Nightwing.
I think while you might look at Changgoon and say that, when he worked for London, they got to the championship, and when he was the head coach for Seoul in 2020, they got to the grand finals. But you also have to, in that case, admit that he's also at least partially responsible for the weird tank rotations that Seoul has, them constantly putting Marvel on off tank instead of main tank, and generally Seoul just being extremely funny and inventive instead of uh, effective. And I think that's where it sort of raises a bit of a question mark for me, is which Changgoon will show up for the Hangzhou Spark? Is it the Changgoon that puts Guxue on Diva for whatever reason, just like he did with Marvel? Or will it be the Changgoon that gets them to the grand finals, which is, again, unlikely because of the level of play from every other team virtually? So I think that's still a bit of a question mark. What I can say, though, is that he has worked for teams for an extended period of time, and hopefully he'll, at least, if nothing else, provide some sense of stability, uh, in the sense that he'll probably not get kicked immediately, unlike the managing staff in the previous year.
Yeah, and he's got three assistant coaches to help him out here. Uh, one of which is Xiaogui, whom I actually don't know anything about. And I don't think you've also researched anything about him, right, Nightwing?
Yeah, but he has apparently been with the team since 2020, uh, the off season in 2020. So he's been with the team for a while, and he's apparently the only piece that stuck uh, out through the 2021 season. So I guess there must be some merit to him, considering every other staff member got kicked.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that the other two assistant coaches are more well known. The first one being Neko, who is an ex flex support player who had coached the Guangzhou Charge last year and also coached WGS Phoenix after that. And he's coming in with a lot of tier 1 experience. And I think he'll focus a lot more on individual gameplay training. So I'm curious to see how he can help this roster kind of reach their point of actualization and reach their full potential. Any comments on Neko, Nightwing?
I mean, I don't really, if I'm being honest. I think he has some work with WGS and some work with Guangzhou. I think I'd still give him some benefit of the doubt for his coaching over Miro, who I'm much more almost appalled by for the pickup. I think Neko still has probably some merit just because he has been picked up consistently by multiple teams. And hopefully he's able to provide some individual value to the team, especially probably helping out uh, INE, because Neko was also a former flex support for the Boston Uprising. Uh, so yeah, Miro, though, is the one that I have a big problem with. I think it's it has to be just an exceptional showing from his sort of coaching side this year, because the man's been, gameplay wise, he's been out of the game for 3 years, uh, probably more, and while he did, quote unquote, pioneer one style of playing Winston, that's really in the past, and the game is played much more differently now. And if you look at the inaugural season of the Overwatch League, it feels like everyone's feeding compared to the gameplay that you see today. So I think his one stint with Team Diamond doesn't instill a lot of confidence in me for Miro, because that team didn't really achieve too much great success outside of one first, second place in one tournament. Everything else is a big stack of blues on Wikipedia, which is not a great sign. I feel like Miro's going to have to prove that he does have the chops to be a good coach if he's going to continue on in this industry, I guess. But I guess it remains to be seen.
Yeah, I completely agree over there. Unfortunately, the OG Winston God who retired after Overwatch League Season 1 can only instill so much confidence in analysts like us. I honestly don't know where to place him and how much influence he'll have over team strategy. I think he'll probably just be a tank coach just because he was able to kind of crack the code to mastering Winston very early on in the game. So he might be someone who can quickly understand the strengths and weaknesses of new heroes, and that might be one reason that they've kept him here. But it's just me shooting in the dark, and we'll just have to see how things go for the team. Um, any further points to add, Nightwing?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to clear up that I genuinely don't think Miro was a master of Winston by almost any means. I think he mastered one style of playing Winston with one set comp that worked out for the Soul Dynasty. But these days, as a Winston player, you need to know many more different comps, and you need to know how to work around different heroes. For example, the Winston play you need for the duplicates comp is almost more similar to Ryan than the classic uh, Winston that you play with an Ana to some degree, because you sort of walk up as six almost, and take space slightly differently compared to Ryan, but it's a completely different play style, and I don't really see Miro having mastered that, considering he spent almost 2.5 years just signed as a streamer and then spent a few months working as a coach. So yeah, that's the end of my rant for Miro. As for the general just state of Hangzhou Spark, again, I'm really just concerned about that support line not having one additional uh, bolster in the flex support role, because I think double flex support might really just bite them if that ends up being a reality, which it probably will, statistically speaking, just somewhere throughout the season. So I think that's a big hole that they need to sign one more player to make up for. I think the rest of the tank line and DPS line are both fine. I'm probably more confident in the tank line than you are, Perlius.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, what do you have to say?
Look, I think overall it's still a pretty good team. They've got like trusted players in Guxue and BERNAR. And they've got a general like synergy established within the team, right? Which is going to be an advantage going into Overwatch 2 because it's a completely different game. So like I don't think the tank line is going to be rubbish, but in recent times, like the management has just made poor choices overall. So as long as they have a stable structure going into next year, I think the tank line is going to get more value for sure. I am optimistic about the DPS line just because they have so much flexibility among these four players, and because so many of them are proven at the highest levels at which they've already played, and the support line is just fantastic with just a slight teeny weeny weakness of them not being able to play double flex support. Um, I think the coaching staff is quite varied, and it's hard to comment on that, but I think they'll be all right. So all in all, a pretty good team. I think they can certainly try for playoffs. I think they can probably qualify for playoffs, but I don't think they're going to be anything top tier. So those are
Mhm.
my overall thoughts on the team, Nightwing. Anything to add?
Yeah, I think in my eyes, I think it's a rough ride even to the playoffs for the Spark, just because of uh, the harsh reality that there aren't that many playoff spots in the Asia region. I mean, obviously at the top you're going to have the Shanghai Dragons. There's almost no debate in that. And the rest of the teams are all extremely competitive. And even with the Valiant stepping up, if they end up beating the Guangzhou Charge, realistically, you could even see the Valiant being a competitor for the Spark, which is pretty hilarious to think about. Um, I think Chengdu is extremely solid. They're probably better than the Spark in my eyes, at least. Uh, Seoul, Philadelphia also extremely competitive against Spark, and they'll probably win out in my eyes. And that makes it a really awkward situation for the Spark in my eyes, where uh, they're going to have to really try hard and probably get lucky uh, if they're going to continue on with this roster and expect to just not see any semblance of double flex support from the opposition at all, because they're just not able to mirror that. And that's something that I think the Spark might really struggle with. Uh, I think it's going to be a rough ride even to the playoffs for the Spark, but hopefully they can make it competitive.
Okay, and that about wraps up our thoughts on the Hangzhou Spark. Thanks a lot for watching this video, and remember to leave a like if you actually liked our analyses, and we will see you in the next one. Bye bye, have a good day.